Hello everyone, Jerry Tabatt with you. Another edition of our military community, sinuses and everything here on this spring day. We got some great information to give you today. We're seeing a lot of people moving to Tyndall, a lot of them out at the Navy base, the housing markets and everything. Well, we're going to talk to a couple of experts today and get it all straightened out and give you the hints you need. And we're also lucky to have a lady that is a military dependent, so she knows a little bit about the military, which we'll talk about also. So without further ado, let me introduce Kaydee Albritton, who is the CEO of CPAR, and Ariane Johnson, who is the president of the CPAR. Thanks for coming in today, ladies.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Before we get going with all this, Kaydee, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm the CEO for the Central Panhandle Association of Realtors. So that means that I manage 8 staff at our association, and then we have a board of directors who I report to directly, 12 members of that board, and we service over 2,400 realtors over our 6-county service area.
So you are busy.
I'm a busy girl.
and you're president, so...
I am. I'm lucky to be president this year. I have been in real estate for about 10 years now, and as you mentioned, I am a military spouse. My husband served his 20 years. And so in this industry, I just really appreciate the relocation that we have to do every few years. I understand how it is to be a newbie. I understand worrying about selling your house, getting a new one.
Well, see, and that's one of the things today that is really one of the hot spots for military people. When they come to a new base, or when they leave, they got a home. We're going to get into all of that, but Kaydee, I'm going to ask you, what's the difference between a realtor and a real estate agent?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Jerry, because not everyone understands that there is a difference. So a real estate agent is somebody who is licensed in their state, but a realtor is specifically somebody who belongs to the National Association of Realtors. So at CPAR, all of our members have a membership with both us, the state association, as well as the National Association. And so what that means is that makes them separate and different than just your average real estate agent. They are bound by the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, so they should be operating with a higher ethical standard, if you will. And then they're also exposed to a lot of additional trainings and designations and things that make them separate and stand out within their industry.
And that's one of the big things we need now is we need reputable people because we are getting an influx at Tyndall, we're getting an influx at businesses, influx at the Navy base. What is our housing situation today? What does it look like?
Well, we have lots of inventory. So what that means is we have sellers ready to sell, and our numbers of inventory right now for Bay County are just about 3,000 available homes for sale. We have builders who are really developing in the area, so we have lots of new builds going up. We're preparing and we're ready, as far as I'm concerned, for the influx of our troops coming in.
And that's going to put a big hit on the inventory. Do you think that that'll cause the prices to rise a little bit?
Well, that's debatable. It depends on who you ask, right? Anytime business increases, you're going to see the sales increase a little bit. Sure. It's going to depend on competition. Depends on how many buyers we have come in. And if we have a big influx at one time, then we're certainly going to see bidding wars increase.
Now, one thing that we're seeing go up all over town, and I'm wondering if this is hurting the market, these apartment complexes. What is that doing to the market? Because it seems like no matter where you turn, there's an apartment complex going up.
I haven't noticed it necessarily affecting sales because it's two very different populations. If somebody wants to buy, they're going to buy. They're not necessarily being drawn to the apartments. And then we also have to talk about, affordable housing. So are people getting a better rate by buying, or are they going to pay a little higher with rent? So we're not really seeing one interfere with the other, but it's giving more options to so if somebody doesn't want to buy or they're only going to be here short term, the apartments are nice to fill those spots.
Okay. We have what we call buyers and sellers markets, and that's confusing to a lot of people. Kaydee, what is a buyer's market and what is a seller's market?
Yep. So in terms of our inventory, what we consider to be a balanced market is having about 6 months of active inventory within our MLS at one time. So anytime you teeter above 6 months, that then transitions into more of a buyer's market, and below 6 months is more of a seller's market because there's more demand. So currently we're sitting at 7.34 months of active inventory in our MLS. So that means that we're transitioning into more of a buyer's market, and sellers might have to negotiate a little more on the pricing of their home.
Now, as we see these homes become available and everything, how is that going to affect what the government is doing now? There's a lot of talk what Washington, D.C. is trying to do. Is that starting to filter into the market now as far as rates? Because if you watch the market rates, your fixed mortgage, your 30-year mortgage, they're real variable. Is that difficult to explain to a potential customer?
Well, I think we all, as realtors, we all say if we had a crystal ball, right? Yeah. We would love to have a crystal ball to say this is what's going to happen, right? I think there's a little bit of a misconception that just because the Fed drops rates does not mean it's necessarily going to affect interest rates. So don't get overly excited if the Fed drops rates. However, our national and state economists have really dug into the numbers. That's their specialties. And we're anticipating to stay in low 6s for probably this year and next year. So much better than the over 7% that we saw. But I don't anticipate we're going to get back down to 3-4%.
Well, you got a lot of statistics there, and I want you to explain some of those, Kaydee. First of all, a lot of people say, well, Jerry, I'm coming to town, friends of mine, we're going to look for a house. They want to know what the difference is between the selling price and the list price. What is that difference usually?
Yeah, so this past month, our sale price to list price was at 96.14%. So that means that sellers who originally put their listing on the market, they're getting about 96% of what they originally asked for. So right now that's pretty good. That's saying that the price of homes are still staying strong and that sellers are able to get, for the most part, what they're wanting. But again, back to that inventory that we mentioned earlier, as we continue to add inventory, that sale to list price may change because eventually, the longer that homes sit on the market, sellers are going to have to be willing to negotiate their prices down because there's a lot of inventory on the market.
What areas in the Panhandle right now, and especially Bay County, where the houses are selling faster than, say, in another area?
Well, I think we see a lot of sales at your $300,000 price and lower, because it's going to be a lot more affordable. And that tends to be on more the east side of Hathaway Bridge, closer to Tyndall, where we do have the troops coming in. They tend to move a little bit faster. It really just depends. As you get up higher, your 500K and higher, they're sitting a little bit longer.
Now, Kaydee, we've talked about this before, either on an interview I did with you earlier and that first Friday and that, but there's a lot of factors that influence the market. And it's not say, okay, well, this month, this factor, next month, this factor. They can be day to day. What are some of the biggest factors influencing the market right now?
Yeah, I would say definitely right now you have a lot of noise from the federal side, right? A lot of the consumer sentiment has gone down significantly in the past 2 months. And I think it's just because of the change in our administration, a lot of uncertainty in our market, and people really waiting for those interest rates to come down, as we mentioned earlier. Yeah. Not only that, but specifically in the state of Florida, insurance is a huge issue. So when you look at, a market where we have seen the price of eggs go up significantly and just day-to-day living, as well as the prices of homes. Then you have high interest rates, and not only that, you have high insurance rates. When you're working with buyers who really every last penny counts, something like an insurance quote could really send them over the edge and make that house no longer affordable for them.
And that's one of the things that I understand that this legislative session is going to work on, because Governor DeSantis says, hey, we need to get these insurance rates down. Is there something that when a potential buyer is looking for a house that they can look at to say, okay, this feature, this feature, this feature, no good on insurance, it'll raise it. This one's better. Is there like a medium that they need to look at?
I think there's a couple of factors. The first one is going to be if it's in a flood zone, because if it's in a flood zone, flood insurance is required, and that could be high depending on the elevation of the property. And then the age of the home. Anything you're looking at 20 years or older, you want to make sure your AC, your water heater are all newer, because that's going to increase your insurance rates. But I encourage anybody, if you're real tight on your budget, have your realtor reach out to a local insurance company to get a quote, so you know ahead of time,
Sure.
and you're not surprised after closing what that rate's going to be.
And that's a big step right there that a lot of people don't realize. Kaydee, let's do this just for an example. Let's say a home sells for $350,000. By the time that home buyer gets their insurance on that, gets their property insurance, gets their down payment and everything, and they get that interest rate on a $350,000 home, what can we, as an average, pay? Okay, I'm going to end up paying this much per month.
That's hard to say specifically. That's very hard. But I would say $2,500. I mean, it depends on all those factors. But you're looking at least a $2,000 a month house payment, I would say.
And that was the point I wanted to make, because you may want that home for $350,000. But if you're going to end up paying $2,500 a month, and you only make $3,000 a month, you can't do that.
Right.
And Jerry, again, I would say back to Ariane's point, that's why it's so important, especially for relocation military, to come in and rely on the local experts. So not only your realtor, but the realtor has people in their back pocket that they can connect them to have a full analysis of that.
And we're going to develop that in just a minute here. But before we get into the military aspect of it, what are some precautions? Let's say it doesn't make any difference if you're military or a civilian coming to town that you need to look for. You say, I want to go to this area. Oh, look at that house. For sale by owner. To me, that's a red flag. There's some things in there that you need to know, right?
I don't think buyers or sellers really understand everything that goes into that transaction. There's a lot of liability on the seller side. Are they disclosing all the information that they are required by state to disclose? Buyers, are you going in with an open eye? Do you know what to inspect? Do you know how to cover yourself? Do you know you're negotiating at the right price point, or is it just a price point thrown out there? What's your insurance going to look like? There are so many factors outside of just a handshake deal that people don't realize it can get you in trouble.
And other things that can get you in trouble is, rent to own or lease to own. Those are really difficult there.
They can be. You really want to go in with eyes wide open and fully educated what you're getting into, because they might sound ideal on the front end. But for a seller, for example, what if they stop paying that rent-to-own price?
Right.
What's your rights? As a buyer, how long do you have before you turn it over into your name completely? There's just a lot of caveats you have to work out to make it a smooth process.
And that's why you need to go to a real estate agent.
A realtor.
A realtor.
Specifically a realtor.
That's right. That's right.
That's why you need to go to the professionals, because you said, Kaydee, you're governed by certain rules and regulations.
Absolutely.
And if you mess up, and that's a confidence level for you. All right, let's get into the military aspect of it. There's so many things going on. Tyndall has an influx right now. I mean, and their military housing is not going to be available. There is a misconception out there that why are these men and women worrying? Because the government will pay for their mortgage. They do not realize that the government only gives them a certain percentage every month.
Right. There's a couple misconceptions. One, if I have to relocate and can't sell my house, the government will buy the house. Well, that's just not accurate. A VA loan is government insured, and what that means is it's a benefit to the lender. If a buyer was to foreclose or run into issues, VA agrees to take care of that loan with the lender, but that doesn't take that responsibility off of the buyer. And then the other thing is, it's important for them to know their BAH and exactly where it's going to fall. And just because we're in this market doesn't mean a certain purchase price is going to fall within those BAH rates.
And one thing I want to find out too is, when I bought my first home, I was in the Air Force and I was out in Tucson back in the late 60s and early 70s. I bought a home out there with a VA mortgage. And at that time, they told me that when I sold that property, if the person that I sold that house to defaulted on the mortgage, it came back to me. Is that still true?
Not if you sell it free and clear.
Okay, what's free and clear?
Well, you turn over the mortgage completely to somebody else and you take your VA eligibility back.
Okay.
So we're seeing a lot of assumptions right now. And what that means is you have a VA home seller that has a 3.5% interest rate. You can have another VA buyer come in and say, hey, I want to take over that interest rate. And I can do that with usually a financing and a cash combo. But you want to make sure for the original VA purchaser, the new VA buyer can move the eligibility to them, and then it frees up that eligibility for them to purchase somewhere else and not be obligated to that home anymore.
And one thing about VA also, if you buy a home with a VA mortgage, the VA has a very tough inspection process to go through, which is probably more strict than just an average bank or whatever is selling you. What is that process, and what is the reason why they are so, like, if this outlet doesn't have the right color, you're not getting a loan until it's fixed.
So a huge benefit of buying with a VA loan is the VA wants to make sure that you're going into a home that is safe, secure. So the appraiser is going to look at things like, is there lead paint that's peeling? Is there a wobbly handrail? Where a normal conventional loan, the lender doesn't necessarily care, what the condition of the home is, but for a VA buyer, you want to make sure it meets those conditions. In our area, we have a huge VA market, and so it's not really a big worry to take over for a seller to accept a VA offer.
Which brings me to the point, Kaydee, you could probably address this, is before Michael came through, we had a good economy as far as military being able to purchase homes and stuff, but everything crashed when Michael came through. And now with the base itself trying to rebuild, how is that coming up over the hump so that we can get our military people back into housing in the area?
Yeah, and I think that was an issue specifically after Michael. Our inventory was completely depleted. Right. And then we saw, unprecedented years of sales through COVID because of those low interest rates. So again, our inventory was highly depleted. So a big part of the issue was inventory. And we see now, based on our conversation earlier, that inventory is coming up. And because of Hurricane Michael, there's a lot of new development happening, which is positive for the military coming in as well. I just heard a stat the other day that the updated number they're using for the rebuild is $6 billion, wow. Which is incredible. Yeah. But, I think that now the issue is less about inventory and it's more about affordability.
And that's the thing, affordability. And area, too, you have to look, a military family, let's face it, and you know this, when we come to a new area, we want a place to live where we feel safe and secure. We want to know where our kids are going to school. And if our spouse has to work, we want to know if there's childcare available. Right. How does that play into when you talk to, say, a family that wants to buy a home? I mean, if they're stationed at Tyndall, I don't think it'd be a good move to buy a home in Wewell.
Maybe, maybe not, yeah. Right? It depends on what they're willing to drive. If they're willing to drive, maybe they want something more in the country. I think it's important when a new customer comes to me, we just sit down and have a full consultation. What are you looking for? What's important? And then it's my job to go out and say, this is what the schools look like in this area. Here's the daycares in the area. Here's where your wife could work, and really fine tune where we should focus on for them.
And over the years too, Kaydee, you've been with CPAR many, many years now. Are VA loans getting easier to get now, or are they a little more difficult with the economy that we have today?
I don't know that I would say they're getting easier necessarily. What would you say?
I don't think they're easier or harder. I would say 90% of my customers are VA, and I don't have any issues. I think if you have an agent that's very informed on what the condition of the home, then it's not an issue. You know, if you have a VA buyer that says, I really want to fix her upper, it's not impossible, but we need to make sure it meets certain things. But it's not necessarily hard. We have a lot of local lenders that specialize in VA loans here.
And that brings me to our next question. You're good at this. VA loans, what is the process that they need to go through? I mean, from what I've been told, and that's why I wanted to ask you, is sometimes it takes longer for the VA loan to be processed than a regular loan that you would get through the bank, just due to the fact the VA has more steps to go through.
And that could be if you have a lender who's not experienced with VA, but most of our lenders are. And so we're seeing a normal timeline to close, 30 days, maybe 45 max. In fact, there's a bit of a benefit because when you do a VA appraisal and that appraiser takes that job, they're required to have that appraisal back within 10 days. Whereas if you do a conventional loan, there's not necessarily a deadline on that. So they have put some rules in place to process those quicker than we used to see.
And are you seeing special programs or more programs come out to help military families to purchase that first home for a lot of them?
It kind of depends on where their income lies. Just the VA loan itself is a huge benefit. I don't think people realize the interest rates are lower. You have 0% down. They have the assumability, so when you go to move, there's a big benefit. A new VA buyer can come in and take over that quicker than a standard buyer. But because of this, we have a program in the state called Hometown Heroes, and there are income guidelines in place. But there's a second mortgage with that, and there's a timeline that falls with that. So sometimes our VA people don't qualify because it has to be paid back, or you have to be in that home so long. And if they're relocating, it can be a bit of a hiccup there.
Kaydee, give me the advantages and disadvantages of a fixed versus a variable rate mortgage.
I'm actually going to let Ariane tell that because she would be more of an expert on that. And keep in mind
she doesn't get paid as much today, does she?
We're not lenders either, so keep that in mind. But Ariane works closer with lenders than I do.
Well, your benefit is going to be just that. If you're fixed, then you know what your payment's going to be every month, right? Adjustable, you just never know. And that's what got people in trouble a long time, like during the 2008 boom/crash, is there was a lot of adjustable rates, and the first year it was great, and then it shot up and they couldn't afford it. Where I'm seeing people like the adjustable is if they know they're only going to be here a couple years and they're willing to risk that it may go up and it may go down. Fixed is usually the most solid way to go. And then refinance in a year or two if you want to.
Adjustable right now are the variable interest rates. What a lot of them are having problems with is what we talked earlier about, is these insurance things. I mean, as insurance goes up, your payment's going to go up too. It may not be a lot, but you have to take that under considerations. Now, if someone lists a home through a realtor, what are some things that the potential buyer needs to be aware of when they're going to talk to you? What should they have as a checklist? Say, okay, you've got this home, Kaydee. What's this, and this? What do you tell people?
Well, one thing I would like to point out, Jerry, is that we've had some new industry standard changes in our business through the National Association of Realtors. So now when a buyer is interested in viewing a home, they'll be required to sign what's called a buyer brokerage agreement and before seeing that home, or a showing agreement or a touring agreement. There's different versions of the relationship agreement, but ultimately they have to have a conversation with the realtor prior, and the realtor has to tell them about their services that they would provide to the potential buyer, as well as what they charge for those services. So they have to have an agreement going into this prior to seeing the home, letting them know what the realtor charges, and if that compensation is not being offered through the listing office or through the seller directly, then the buyer would ultimately be held responsible for paying that.
And that's the point of going through a realtor. I mean, I can sell anybody anything on the street. But I can tell you anything. I can tell you the sky's going to turn dark tonight. Oh, really? Yeah, well, okay.
Yeah.
But once I get this all processed and everything, especially with the VA, you said turn around when you get orders because, I mean, let's face it, we don't stay in one place very long. What's that turnaround time from the time that the orders are received by the military family to the time that they're gone and that home is sold? And while they're in that process, are they still making the monthly payments?
Yes. Until the home sells, even if you relocate, you're still going to be responsible for your payments. Sellers, our VA sellers are getting a lot more educated on the process, and they're getting used to the timeline and the turnover of their orders. I'm finding people are coming to me months ahead of time their orders and saying, hey, we're going to be leaving. We don't have orders yet. Let's start preparing. We'll put it on the market as soon as I get those orders in hand and it's official. So they're preparing more, which protects them from having an overlap of this mortgage and then a mortgage at the new location.
So there's so many different things in there that need to be taken into consideration instead of say going down the street and say, oh, for sale by owner, for lease, rent to own, all that. You got to be so careful. And if you talk to your buddies about it, they're going to say, oh yeah, well, let's just, you have to talk to the expert. and one thing, Kaydee, that a lot of people don't realize, it doesn't cost any money to go in and talk to a realtor and say, hey,
Exactly.
I'm thinking about getting home. What can I do here?
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Realtors are always happy to provide a consultation to a buyer just to understand their needs and what might be available to them. And as I mentioned, it's not until they go and see a home that they have to enter into a relationship. And if, no contract is written, then, there's nothing that is owed to that realtor. But that's what they're there for. They're there to provide a service to the buyer and share their expertise and help them through that. And they're happy to do that.
And I have found that a lot of buyer-realtor relationships, you develop that trust and everything, and it's like you have family, and that's what's so important.
Absolutely.
Because that is a huge investment. Most people buy one home, and that's it. We're about to run out of time here. This is getting ridiculous. I'll have to have you all back again. We'll go for another half hour.
Absolutely.
But we just have a couple minutes left. Kaydee, what's your final thoughts, please?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be on here today. Many people in the community know CPAR. They've heard about CPAR, but I would encourage them to learn and know more because our realtors are really doing a lot of amazing things throughout the community, not just working with buyers and sellers, but giving back to the community. Last year, we were able to give back over $90,000 through our fundraising events, so I would encourage the community to participate in those fundraising events. They benefit many of the charities that you know and love, and ultimately, realtors, we're making our mark this year, right?
That's right, making our mark.
Oh, that's good. Ariane?
To piggyback on that from the realtor standpoint, use a realtor. It doesn't cost anything to talk to us. I highly encourage everybody to interview 2 or 3 realtors. We have very different personalities. Everybody has different specialties. But connect with somebody that's going to walk you through the process and keep you protected.
Yeah, that's the big thing right there. And very quickly, Kaydee, what's your connection, what you said 6 counties. Tell people what the 6 counties are that you service.
Yes, we service Bay, Jackson, Holmes, Calhoun, Washington, and we just added Liberty County as well. So pretty much, down from the water up to the Alabama line, we have that area.
Okay. All right. Military housing, we're going to do okay with that because it's coming on the market here and everything. Patience. People have to be patient.
As a seller especially, be patient. Your home will sell. Just give us some time. It's taking a few months instead of 2 weeks.
How do you convince, when you know a home is overpriced, say they want $500,000 and you know it's going to appraise at $320,000? How do you tell them, look, come on back down to reality here?
You tell them just that. Come on back down to reality. Here's the paperwork and the stats as to why, we want to price it a certain way.
And that's why you want a realtor. You don't
That's right. We have the data at our fingertips to help them.
You got so much data.
That's right.
It took me a month to go through.
Yeah.
Kaydee, Ariane, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, we are definitely out of time with this edition of our military community. Again, CPAR, Central Panhandle Association of Realtors. They're out by the Hathaway Bridge. You don't need an appointment. Stop in and see them. We'll see you next week on our military community.